Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? It's me again, Brian, aka Gamer55551, and I am back with a My 2 Cent video for this week, for the week of December 21st to the 27th, 2025. Happy holidays to everyone out there, whether you celebrated Hanukkah, Christmas, or Kwanzaa, if I'm saying the name correctly, regardless of it is. Hopefully you had a good holidays. Hopefully you spent it with families and everything. Also, I do want to point out that there won't be any video review for this week. It's usually the end of the month, and usually I use that one end of the month to, take a little break from doing any video reviews. Plus, also, it's the holidays. I'm sure a lot of folks out there are spending time with families and so forth and all. But anyway, we got 4 stories to cover this week, including an interesting interview in going into the development of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond that recently came out. A comment made by Bloober Team that sounds interesting of a what is basically going to be a Switch exclusive and something, or Switch 2 exclusive. Xbox or Microsoft responded to a rumor that came out about the targeted 30% profit margin, though, and a comment made by Asperities regarding the possibility that other Tomb Raider games like Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadows of the Tomb Raider could make its way over to possibly the Switch or Switch 2 and all. If you're interested in where I got the source of these information, though, links will be in the description of this video, along with the timestamps if there are certain parts of the video which to skip to, if you're watching this video either on YouTube or Patreon and all. But before we get started, I would like to start with to call the quick My 2 cents, stories that kind of caught my attention, but I'm not going to go into a huge amount of details. The first one has to do with the fact that 007 First Light, the latest new James Bond game by IO Interactive, has been pushed back about a couple of months and all. It was supposed to be released a little bit earlier this year or something. I think it was March, or I think it was either March or February, but pardon me if I got the original release date wrong. But either way, though, they are pushing it a little bit back. And, while that might be a bit unfortunate, though, I am hopeful that this gives the development team enough time to maybe iron out some areas and everything. There are those who saw the trailer and were concerned about certain things, such as frame rate and stutter and all, though. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm more curious about how the Switch 2 version of 007 First Light is going to look and play on the Nintendo Switch 2, though. That one is the one that kind of is going to caught my attention, and I'm hoping we see some information about the Switch 2 version at some point down the road, or hopefully soon and all. But in either case, though, it looks like 007 First Light's release date is going to be pushed back a couple of months. The other one that's just come out is, at least this is being recorded from several sources, that seems that a Switch 2 version of Call of Duty could be finally be coming to Nintendo Switch 2 next year, or in a couple of months, though. Now, for those who may or may not be familiar, Nintendo and Microsoft signed a 10-year deal to bring Call of Duty over to Nintendo's platform, particularly, most were pointing to at the time, the Switch successor, which now becomes the Switch 2 and all. This was around the time when Microsoft was in the process of buying Activision Blizzard. It was sort of like one of the remedies, let's just say, to try to get it over the line to get the official approval that they own Activision Blizzard and all. And since then, we haven't heard much about about Call of Duty and everything like that. But it will be very interesting if it does come next year, whether or not it will be the newer Call of Duties that come out, although there has been some back and forth with Black Ops 7 in terms of how well that game did and everything, to whether it's just ports of some of the older Call of Duty games, or if it's just Warzone making its way over to the Switch 2. So it remains to be seen exactly how this is going to play out, though. And if it is Warzone, that's going to be interesting, considering the amount of space and storage that thing takes up and all. So hopefully we'll hear something maybe next year in regards of Call of Duty, though. Whether it does well on the Switch 2 or not, if it does come to the Switch 2, remains to be seen at this time. We also learned that Persona 3 Reloaded got an update for the Switch 2, but there is a little bit of a caveat, though, and that is this. The good news is, if you have the system docked, though, you can update it to make it run at 60 frames per second like the other versions, which is good. The bad news is, however, it doesn't seem that this is only for dock mode. In portable mode, it's only going to run at 30 frames per second, which, while I'll admit that is a little bit unfortunate, considering that this is an RPG and all, not like an action RPG or anything like that, I don't see it as a huge negative compared to, like, say, if we're talking about a fast-paced type of a game or anything like that. Still, I will admit it is sort of a bit unfortunate if this report is correct. The fact that this is only running at 30 frames per second in portable mode, but in dock mode you can get it running up to 60 frames per second. But in either case, it is interesting that they brought this update and all. Hopefully they'll find a way to get it running at 60 frames per second in portable mode, but again, time will ultimately tell if that is the case. We also learned that the Mario Kart World bundle that was released around the launch of the Switch 2, which is one of the bundles that were available during that launch, it seems that the report comes out that basically they have that bundle is coming to an end and all. This was supposedly someone snapped a picture while working at GameStop that seemed to indicate that the bundle was coming to an end and everything, which I wouldn't be completely shocked if it's true and all. I do think it's a little bit unfortunate, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case and all, though. So it will be interesting to see what this means going forward, whether or not this means that the bundle might come back maybe next holiday season. I mean, we've seen how Nintendo has bundled Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with basically the Switch 1, and that seems to have sold very well indeed. So it will be interesting to see if that's the case. We see something like that maybe next year or something, but for now, if this report's true, it doesn't look like it's basically going to basically means that this is the end, at least for the time being, this bundle of Mario Kart World with the Switch 2. We also learned that basically Square Enix's Octopath Traveler series seems to have hit another milestone, which I think is good because I do like the games in general, Octopath Traveler and all. I do think they're paying homage to the old school like JRPGs back in the day, and I like that HD 2D look that the game is known for and all. I know some people think are being burned out by it and everything, and that is true to some extent, but I think the visual style can work when done correctly, and I think it could open the door to bringing maybe remake or reimagining of classic RPGs in general. There have been some rumors about Chrono Trigger getting an HD 2D remake, although supposedly that rumor's been debunked at the very least, but kind of opened up a Pandora's box, indeed. But in either case though, nice to see the series is doing very well. We also learned that supposedly Ubisoft is working with Nintendo to improve the VRR support for the Switch 2. This one, the VRR support has been mixed. Some folks are a little iffy with it though, but it seems that if Ubisoft's helping out, it seems that Ubisoft really seems to be more into the Switch 2 lately. We recently had Star Wars Outlaw came out though. Assassin's Creed Shadow recently came out indeed. There has been some claims about they're not sure if Avatar Pandora. I think that Avatar Pandora game will make its way over to Switch 2. Although I tend to believe I'm leaning towards more likely it probably will. Whether or not it sees the light of day, who knows? But it does seem to indicate that they are basically more into the Switch 2, which is why they are working with Nintendo to bring the VRR support. Though it will be interesting to see if other developers follow suit as well. We also learned that supposedly the head of the series boss of the Zelda series basically read that the next Zelda game could basically be partially inspired by the recent spin-off, sort of referring to Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment that just recently came out and everything, and which would be very interesting if that's the direction they kind of go with the next Zelda game and all, though. It is very curious because supposedly Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom pretty much concluded the Breath of the Wild trilogy and all, so it'll be interesting to see what the next Zelda game is. There have been some rumors about Ocarina of Time getting a remake treatment, which is a possibility. Don't know if that will happen or not though, but I am curious to see what the next direction for the Zelda series could be. Honestly, I'm not against the open world approach though. I think there are some areas they can do some improvement on, but I'm not completely against the idea of them taking the open world approach and all, but we'll see what happens once we start learning about the next Zelda game and everything like that. We also learned that the shareholders for EA recently have given the approval of the public investment funds by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, which is funded by Saudi Arabia, to begin, greenlit them to take over EA and everything. This was announced, I think a while back, that they have recently started to take some stake into EA in general and all. Again, there's some mixed feelings about this decision, though, to be exact, though. Yes, EA does have a right. EA is a publicly owned company and can do this if they want to, but there's some concerns about some of the decision to have this firm basically have some stake into EA and all. There was also some questions about this firm being part of when Paramount was trying to buy Netflix and everything. So this has been questionable and considered controversial depending on who you're asking about this, though. But so far, the shareholders seem to be all on board with this and everything. And last but not least, and this is kind of a tragic news to be exact, though, we learned that Vince Zampella unfortunately has passed away and all. For those who are not familiar, he basically was in charge of Respawn Entertainment, but he had some time with Infinity Ward and worked on, the Call of Duty, particularly the Modern Warfare games and all. And recently he helped out basically with Battlefield 6, which seems to have gone very well with a lot of folks out there and all. And sadly, he passed away in a car crash, which is very unfortunate indeed. Even though I may not be a huge Battlefield or Call of Duty fan or anything like that, though, it's still nevertheless, he left his mark in the gaming industry. Indeed, especially if you enjoyed whether it's those games that he worked on, to even the Titanfall, which many did like Titanfall 2 campaign, to even part in Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor as well, which was certainly Star Wars Souls-like game, which certainly wasn't a bad thing indeed. So in either case, though, very unfortunate to hearing him pass away, though, and certainly my heart goes out to his friends and family out there, indeed and all. And in the movie and TV show part of the Quick My 2 Cents, we learned that basically Avatar Fire and Ash, despite getting a, let me see the drop though. I think there was was down 18% though. It has basically, according to the Hollywood Report, has grossed $500 million at the box office so far as of Christmas Day. On Christmas Eve, the movie earned about $10.7 million domestically and $11 million internationally. In total, Fire and Ash has earned $129.2 million in North America and $353.6 million internationally as of Christmas Eve, with the main holiday itself on December 25th, helping the film reach this impressive milestone. So it does seem to be that Avatar Fire and Ash, despite some people being mixed on the movie, though, I saw it myself, though, and I thought it was good. Maybe not as good as the first one, but still enjoyable nevertheless. Though it's doing very well at the box office, and there was some concern about that, whether or not this will, if this could be maybe the last entry and everything like that. No one knew for certain if this film was going to do well or not, but judging by the numbers so far, it seems to be doing fine and everything. It will be very interesting to see if James Cameron does go ahead with Avatar 4 and 5 that he was supposedly might do, so basically shoot back to back. If Avatar 4 and 5 does happen though, personally I would like to see them now focus on, Jake Scully and his kids and everything. I think it's now time to pass the torch on to them and let them take the reins and all. So should that happen and everything. But so far it sounds like it's doing very well and everything like that. We're also learning about the whole Netflix and WB saga seems to continue as Paramount's Larry Anson has signed a financial guarantee with basically in regards of Paramount and everything, especially in terms of trying to acquire WB and everything like that. Meanwhile, Netflix is basically has boasted its funding in terms of the Warner Brothers acquisition. I'm still in the camp believing more than likely Netflix will buy Warner Brothers and all, despite Paramount or the Edisons really trying hard to do so. I still believe more likely Netflix will probably succeed. I could be wrong, but time will ultimately tell them. Indeed, though, I do question some of the decisions with Paramount, ranging from Aulx is one of those areas, though, but some of the outlook for theaters, because recently there was an Avatar movie in development, but they have now changed that into basically having that air only on Paramount Plus, which kind of contradicts a comment where they mentioned how they wanted to do like 30 or so movies in a certain amount of movies in 1 year and everything, and this kind of just contradicts that statement right away. Indeed, though, again, things could change over time. There is that possibility, but right now, I still believe Netflix will most likely buy Warner Brothers Discovery, regardless whether you agree or disagree with that. That is going to be entirely up to a lot of folks. Have people have different views on that. And last but not least, we're learning by someone by the name of Daniel Richmond is claiming that a new Sonic live-action TV show is in the development for Paramount. For those who are not familiar, they did do a live-action one, basically entitled Knuckles, which I didn't think was bad. It just wasn't, just not as good as I hoped it was going to be, though. There were some good moments, and there were some moments, indeed, though, with that one. But either way, though, it sounds like they could be in the works, although the person who's making this claim supposedly doesn't have a great track record, so a grain of salt does have to be taken on this one. That said, I wouldn't be against the idea of a live-action Sonic movie taking place in the same Sonic universe and everything like that the movies are. There's been some talks about the possibility of a Knuckles and Shadow, considering those who saw Sonic the Hedgehog 3 knows what happened to Shadow the Hedgehog, indeed. So time will ultimately tell, so we'll have to wait and see on that one. So I am taking this one with a grain of salt, though, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility that another live-action Sonic show could happen and everything. Okay, with the Quick My 2 Cent part now done, along with the movie and TV show part of the Quick My 2 Cent, we'll get started with our first story, and this one has to do with the Tomb Raider series, particularly the recent release of the Tomb Raider that was part of, I think, the PS3, 360, PS4, Xbox One era, though, or often referred to as the Survivor series, made its way to the Switch 1 and also on the Switch 2 and all. Now, this one was an interesting shadow drop that came out of nowhere for a lot of folks, though, and to see this game become available, including onto the Nintendo Switch system, was certainly interesting indeed, done by Asperity, if I'm saying the name correctly, though, which, however, has a history of, when it comes to ports, can be a hit and miss. There's some controversies in terms of how they handle some of the ports, unlike Aulx Studio, although there's some controversy surrounding their recent report, I think, of a System Shock remake that didn't exactly go over very well and all. But nevertheless, though, this was an interesting port indeed, even though there were some I won't say controversy, some criticisms about the visuals, to be exact, though, even though the Switch 2 version did run at 60 frames per second, which is certainly a good thing, indeed. Well, recently there was a question asked to the developers about the possibility that could we get other entries in the Survivor trilogy, aka Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, make their way over to Nintendo's platform, more likely Switch 2, but who knows and all. Well, they recently responded to this, and this is from an article from Nintendo Life, which basically reads that, quote, according to Asperity's production manager, the passionate response from Nintendo fans has apparently given the team strong encouragement to consider more. This is what they said in an interview with Nintendo Everything recently, though. This game kicks off the Tomb Raider Survivor trilogy, so we need to ask the obvious question. Is Asperity interested in bringing over Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadows of the Tomb Raider to Nintendo platform as well? Asperity's responds by saying, quote, we have definitely seen this question. We successfully brought back the classic era, I think 1 through 4. if I'm saying the number correctly though. And now the origin story of Lara Croft to modern Nintendo platforms. We cannot answer anything at the moment, but the passionate response to this release is strong encouragement for us to continue exploring those possibilities and all. Well, I will say that certainly is good news indeed. Obviously nothing official at this time. Clearly I would say the developers are probably going to be taking a look to see how well the game does sales-wise though, particularly on the eShop, since the game only has a digital release at this time, although with the reports coming out of the possibility that we could get a 16 and 32-bit Switch 2 cart, there is a possibility that game could make its way into like a physical version. That's a possibility, or game key card. So nothing's out of the realm of possibility at this time and everything, but the fact that they are encouraged to considering bringing those games over, it's certainly good news indeed, especially for those who want to play, the trilogy of those games and all though. I'm hoping that Tomb Raider on the Switch and Switch 2 does well enough to convince the developers to bring, Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadows of the Tomb Raider over to the Nintendo Switch, particularly on the Switch 2. And who knows, maybe this opens the door to the possibility. We know there are 2 new Tomb Raider games, including one that I think is a remake of the first one. Maybe those can make their way over to the Switch 2. There's always that possibility indeed. So it certainly is encouraging news indeed. Obviously, it's not the official confirmation some may have hoped for, but it certainly is in a step in the right direction, at least how I'm seeing that. So overall, certainly nice indeed that they are thinking about bringing Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadows of the Tomb Raider over to the Switch 2. If they do bring those games over, it'll be interesting to see how well they have that game running on the Switch 2 and maybe try to improve some of the visuals, because I know the Tomb Raider game, which the visuals, let's just say, got a mixed response when that game came over to the Switch and Switch 2. Hopefully, if they do bring Rise and Shadow over to the Switch 2, hopefully they can at least improve with the visuals and all, especially with the Switch 2's DLSS in the system and everything. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get to our second part, and this one has to do with Microsoft responding to a report that came out about them trying to hit a 30% profit margin and everything. So we'll take a quick break, and we will be right back. Okay, and we are back with part 2 of my 2 cent video, and for this one we're going to be taking a look at Xbox, particularly them supposedly responding to a rumor or report going out saying they had to for a lot of the studios to hit a 30% margin profit and all. Now, Microsoft, particularly with the Xbox brand, has sort of been in an odd position ever since they sort of have taken let's just say a different approach of having their games available on other systems outside of the Xbox system as well. Now, this has certainly split some Xbox fans, to be exact, to some of their approaches and all. Some like it, others don't, so there's different views on it indeed. And there have also been, with them finally, owning Activision Blizzard, there's been talks about them trying to recoup some of that money and everything like that. And one of the interesting reports came out a couple months ago was from a report on Bloomberg from Jason Schreier, who I will say has a good history on reporting on some of this stuff, about a claim basically that they want their studios and them to hit a 30% margin profit. Now, at the time, some people thought that was kind of insane and everything, and thought that was a bit ridiculous, especially given the direction Xbox has been going lately. However, recently Microsoft has responded to this, and this was when they were on CNBC making this response. Anyway, in an article from Pure Xbox, it reads that, quote, "Over the past couple of months, you may have come across this idea that Microsoft has placed a 30% profit margin on the Xbox division. This stems from a report that first mentioned back in October. At the time, Bloomberg reported how these profit margins were well above the industry average of 17 to 22%, while Xbox has ranged between 10 and 20% over the past 6 years. However, Microsoft has directly responded to this claim in a response to CNBC, telling the outlet how, despite setting an ambitious goal, the 30% margin target is incorrect. Basically, they said that, Yeah, that is incorrect and everything. In the original report from Bloomberg, it was mentioned the game maker at Xbox weren't asked to hit specific numerous targets in the past, but the new target was implemented by Microsoft CFO Annie Hood in late 2023. There were also suggestions these high expectations from Microsoft have contributed to the cancellation project, raises prices, and loss of jobs that was seen over the past couple of years at Xbox. Nevertheless, Microsoft is saying 30% target is hogwash, although we wouldn't be surprised if it's still relatively close to that figure. The company clearly expects big things for Xbox, and here's hoping it all works out in 2026. Now, whether you believe Microsoft on this or not is entirely up to you. Some might not, but I can understand why some might not, considering when it's come to messaging, I feel like Microsoft has not done a good job trying to explain their position, though. Now, probably one of the best example is the whole Tango Gameworks debacle, where they talked about how they weren't close, about how Hi-Fi Rush was great, it won awards and everything like that, and then they closed the studio down after making some of those claims, contradicting themselves, plus them releasing a new controller, which did not go over very well because it came out on the same time Tango Gameworks was closed, until they had to take that stuff down a bit. Although we know Tango Gameworks has now been sold off and is owned by I think a South Korean firm or something like that. But in either case, though, there's just been some decisions made by Microsoft that have been questionable and best, and I can see why some people would view this 30% profit margins and everything. Now, again, you can believe this, whether this is true or not, though. It's given Jason Schreier's history and given some of his reporting that he's done in the past. I would say I'm leaning more towards this probably is true and all. And it just feels like sometimes I do question some of the decisions Microsoft is making in general. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the layoffs and cancel projects have ties to this whole call 30% margin and everything like that. But again, I don't work at Microsoft, so I can't say 100% for sure that is actually true and all. But like I said, given Jason Schreier's history, I tend to lean towards him probably being mostly spot on this. So overall, Microsoft, after waiting like a month or so, responded to this. They're denying the claim that it is that they're asking their folks to hit a 30% margin in the profit margin in the Xbox division. But given this is from Jason Schreier, I tend to be, in this, at least from my view, tend to be more on believing what he has written and everything. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get to part 3. And this one has to do with Bloober Team making an interesting statement about the next game supposedly being a Nintendo exclusive and all. So we'll take a quick break, and we will be right back. Okay, and we are back with part 3 of my My 2 Cent video, and for this one, we're going to be taking a look at a comment made by Bloober Team and all regarding a title that sounds like more like a Nintendo exclusive, particularly more likely for the Switch 2 and all. Now, Bloober Team is certainly a name that I think most have heard of before, though, as they've done mostly horror games, but we've seen them do stuff like Medium to basically even doing the remake of Silent Hill 2 and all, which is supposedly will be coming to I believe other systems as well. And Chronos: The New Dawn and Layer of Fear. Chronos and I think Layer of Fear just recently got released on the Switch 2 and all, but they've mostly done what sounds like mostly horror titles to a certain degree and all. Well, recently they sat down with an interview with Nintendo Insider, and it sounds like they brought up a bunch of games of what we could expect for their next game. And one particular title they brought up was very interesting indeed, as this one has not been seen since, I believe during the GameCube era and all. Well, anyway, this is from Nintendo Life, but the question has been asked, and this got this from, from Nintendo Insider, and the question was asked, quote, While the title hasn't been announced, can you go into what players should expect from Project M, the Nintendo platform exclusive horror title from Bloober and all? Supposedly this was announced in July of last year. They made this announcement of this project of July of last year. Anyway, moving on to what the CEO had to say, he said, quote, "You have no idea how hard it is for me not to reveal what Project M truly is. But for now, it's still too early to talk about it. We're confident that we'll be able to share the first details very soon. What I can say is this. Fans of Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Limbo, and, here's the one, Eternal Darkness will immediately feel at home. That said, Project M introduced a bold twist, one that no horror game has ever explored before. This is a vision that can only exist on Nintendo's platform. While details of Project M originally surfaced last year, it was described as having a budget significantly smaller than the company's usual projects, and it's a game being developed in cooperation with the world best creators from the Nintendo platform, which to me sounds like this will be a Nintendo exclusive and all. In the same interview, the CEO also acknowledged the incredible support from the team at Nintendo, mentioning how Nintendo Trust has guided and empowered Bloober and all. So this is a very interesting thing, and the fact that they brought up Eternal Darkness is also very interesting indeed as well, since that one, although it did have a horror element, it felt more like, to me it kind of felt more a little bit on the psychological side of, you could say, of a horror to a certain degree. So, but still, it's going to be very interesting to see this kind of what they are going to bring in all, and the fact that, and it'll be very interesting to see how the gameplay is going to be. Is it going to be like what Chronos: The New Dawn in terms of like an over-the-shoulder third-person view? Is it going to be something completely different and all? And the fact that Nintendo is being involved with this, I'm kind of curious to see how this game, what rating this game is going to get, because I think a lot of their games they've done M-rated, and although, believe it or not, Nintendo has done some M-rated games before. They funded, games like the Bayonetta 2 and 3, to be exact, were M-rated, and I believe Emio the Smiling Man was also M-rated as well. So this would be very interesting to see if that is the case with this one, indeed. And I am very curious and all about the type of game that they are working on and everything. And I do wonder, with this, them working with them on this, I wonder if this means this could open the door for Bloober Team to maybe bring, more games to the Switch 2 and all, with some of the, help from Nintendo and everything, whether it's, the Silent Hill 2 remake, to even maybe some of their other games or anything like that. So it's certainly interesting indeed. And the fact, and like I said, bringing up Eternal Darkness was also interesting though. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, depending on who owns the rights or everything like that, maybe a remaster or remake of Eternal Darkness, that having Bloober Team handle that would be interesting if that does happen though, okay? I'm not saying it will happen, but it's certainly, I wouldn't be opposed to the idea if it were to happen indeed. So overall, very interesting to see what this title is though. And it's going to be very interesting to see how they utilize the Switch 2 and everything, including the Switch 2's DLSS. And if this is an M-rated game, and I'm kind of leaning more towards it, more than likely will, that's interesting indeed, considering that Nintendo, like I said, they don't often do M-rated games, but we've seen, Bayonetta 2 and 3 and Emio the Smiling Man. This would be interesting if this did get like an M-rated logo on it, indeed and all. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get to our fourth and final part, and this one has to do with a interview and somewhat of an insight into the development of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond and all. So we'll take a quick break, and we will be right back. Okay, and we are back with our fourth and final part of our My 2 Cent video, and for this one, we're going to be taking a look at a recent interview in regards of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Now, since its release though, and a game that has been in development for a while though, Metroid Prime 4 has sort of gotten a mixed response depending on who you're asking though. There are some who enjoyed the game, and there are some who hate it. There are some parts people don't like, some parts that some people do though. I've invested about 2 hours into Metroid Prime though, so I have to dig a little bit deeper into the game and everything like that. But I will say, based on my time with it so far, I'm enjoying it though. It's the classic Metroid Prime that I definitely like and everything like that. The visuals and the music of the game are really good, indeed. And I'm not bothered with some of the NPCs as much as I know some folks out there have made the claim. I certainly don't have any issues with them. At least that's my opinion about the game so far and all. That said, however, not every review has been very kind to the game, to be exact though, and some critics have had their issues with the game and all. One of the controversial things seems to be the open world part. Well, it's not the only part, but it certainly is one of the areas, indeed. But at the same time, Nintendo recently sat down with Famitsu and basically made some comments in terms of the development of the game and so forth though. Now, this was translated, I believe, was brought by a Nintendo spokesperson whose name isn't given, and it was basically by Nintendo Everything that were the translation. Here's what part of the interview had to say. Quote, "At the start of the project, perhaps due to the influence of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, we saw a lot of comments on the internet saying we want to play an open world Metroid. However, Metroid's core element of increasing the amount of explorable areas by unlocking powers is not very compatible with the freedom to go anywhere from the beginning of an open world. Thus, we designed a limited area that could freely explore and have a hub that could connect to other areas. Then we thought that if one could move around the bike in a satisfying way in that area, it could be a segment that magnetites, if I'm saying, apologize if I'm butchering that name, the tension from exploration and the pace of the whole game. In the end, the game took much longer than expected to finish, and we realized that players' impression towards open world games have changed. That being said, development had already been resetted once before when we started again from scratch with Aulx Studio, so backtracking development again was out of the question, and we resolved to move forward with our original vision. During this time, shooting games and action games went through evolutions with an increase in game speed in particular, but taking in those changes would have made it difficult to construct the tempo of an adventure game, so we actually chose not to take them into account. Therefore, I think this game is pretty much divorced from the changings of time." So obviously, judging by assuming what this translation is correct, it's clear that some of the stuff that some people may or may not have liked, though, by then it was already too late to really change anything at this moment. So they just had to pretty much just continue from what they went with and all, which, I kind of can see why to some extent and all, though. Again, I have to see more of the game and everything like that, though. I have to really get a good feel of the so-called bike or open world part that some may or may not like. Indeed, though, obviously, I can understand, considering the fact that an open world Metroid does sound interesting. I will admit that, though, but I can understand why some people wouldn't want it to be open world, considering we've seen how some developers have gone a little bit overboard with open world formula. Ubisoft is one example that we've seen done many times before in the past and everything. So it will be interesting, assuming this game does well, and I think it will. I certainly believe it will and all. It will be interesting to see going into Metroid Prime 5 if that, supposedly that's happening though, whether or not they take a different approach and maybe re-examine some of their approaches going forward with that game and everything and all. So that certainly would be interesting to see if that does happen and everything. So yeah, it is sort of interesting, the fact that the whole open world is sort of mixed for a lot of folks out there. Another thing we learned is supposedly the timeline where Metroid Prime 4 takes place. And there have been some reports seem to indicate that it takes place after Super Metroid, but before the start of Metroid Fusion and all. That's what I've at least heard. Again, I can't say 100% if this is spot on or not, though, considering the fact that we know Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3 took place after the event of the first Metroid, but before the start of Metroid 2, Return of Samus and all. But in either case, though, it's going to be interesting to see what Retro Studios and Nintendo does with, say, a Metroid Prime 5 and what kind of direction they go with that one. Whether they some elements from 4 make it into it or not, though. So it's certainly an interesting and fascinating situation, given what the process that 4 had to go through in terms of the whole development situation when it was first announced on, back in 2017. Then they rebooted it in 2019, went with Retro Studios instead and all. So overall, I would say it's an interesting interview they had with Famitsu, and assuming the translation is spot on, though, it seems as though there was some mixed bags in terms of the open world approach. Indeed, at least according to what some of the spokesperson from Nintendo basically said. Again, I haven't gotten to that point. When I get there, I'll have to give my own opinion whether or not it was the right thing for them to do or not, indeed at all. Okay, this concludes my 2 cent video for this week. And again, these are my opinion. What are yours? What are your thoughts about the possibility that Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadow of the Tomb Raiders could make its way over to the Switch, particularly the Switch 2 and all? Do you want those games to come over to the Switch 2 in any way, or Switch 1, or do you prefer just the Switch 2 indeed? Do you think Asperity should handle those ports, or do you think another studio should handle those ports of those games if it should come to the Switch, to the Nintendo's platform at all? What are your thoughts about this Microsoft responding to this 30% profit margin? Do you think it was right for them to respond? Do you think it was a little too late? Or do you think Jason Schreier was spot on his report back in October in a Bloomberg article and all? What are your thoughts about Bloober Team working with Nintendo in terms of this so-called horror game that they're working on for Nintendo's platform, though? Are you excited for what Bloober Team has in store for Nintendo's platform, though? Were you surprised that they mentioned games like Eternal Darkness in any way as some of their inspiration for this so-called horror game that's going to be on supposedly exclusive to Nintendo's platform and all? And what are your thoughts about this interview with Famitsu in regarding Metroid Prime 4 Beyond in terms of the development, though? Do you think it was a mistake for Nintendo to take the open world or somewhat open world approach for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond? If should Metroid Prime 5 happen, do you think they should ditch that approach altogether? Or do you think they should expand upon that maybe in a Metroid Prime 5 game in any shape and any form? Do you agree with what I said in this video? Do you disagree? Do you have a difference of opinion? As always, sound off in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. And if you do like this video, I hope you hit the like button. I would appreciate it. And I hope you do subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you do, make sure you hit the bell icon for notifications of any new videos I put up. Also, feel free to share this video if you want to, and feel free to donate to my channel if you like. You can do it through PayPal Me, Patreon, or Steam Labs. Again, links will be in the description of this video, assuming you're watching this either on YouTube or Patreon. And I will see you again next time when I do another video. Hopefully that'll be soon. Until then, from Southern California, hopefully I will see you again next time. Or I'll see you around then. Bye.